Welcome to Backup Exec 2012 Remote Agents. If you're following along in the materials, we are in the Manage and Administer book, Lesson 1. In this lesson, we'll discuss the agent for Windows, its capabilities and functions, how to install the agent for Windows, and what the agent does to protect the computers that you're backing up. Then we will discuss the agent for Linux. We'll go through the functions of the agent for Linux and how to back up Linux servers using the agent for Linux. Let's begin with the agent for Windows. If you want to back up any machine, whether it's Windows or Linux, it must have an agent on it. The agent is a separately installed component, perhaps a separately licensed component. The agent is responsible for packaging up all the data on the machine that you're backing up, converting it into Microsoft tape format or MTF, and transmitting that data to the Backup Exec server where it can be backed up. So the agent provides much faster backup processing because it's packaging that data up locally. It is optimized for 32-bit or 64-bit Windows servers. It allows me to back up and restore even if there's a firewall. I can use specified networks so I can route the traffic through my storage area network or SAN. It displays a list of remote computers on the server's side so that you can see all the computers that are eligible to be backed up, and it highly increases the performance of the backup by managing all the data locally. So the Backup Exec engine on the server side is what kicks off the job, and it will send a message to the agent on the client side that says, please send me data. A backup job needs to begin. beremote.exe is the actual agent executable that is responsible for gathering the data, compressing it into Microsoft tape format or MTF. It can provide software compression or encryption depending on how the backup is configured. So beremote is responsible for gathering up all the data and sending it across the wire to beengine, which is the executable that is responsible for taking that data and committing it to the final destination. The remote agent should be licensed on any server that you're backing up. So you may have to purchase licenses specifically for the remote agent. However, if you have purchased the license for applications and databases, that includes a remote agent. So the license for applications and databases pertains to Exchange, SQL, SharePoint, Lotus Domino, Oracle. When you purchase that agent, you have also purchased the right to put the remote agent or the agent for Windows on the SQL server or Exchange server that you're backing up. So in that instance, I don't have to purchase a separate license for the agent for Windows or the agent for Linux, depending on your environment. By default, the remote agent advertises to all of the Backup Exec servers in your environment. So any Backup Exec server can back up any machine that's running the agent for Windows. So it may be a licensed agent, it may be an agent that was included with another license. Either way, all the Backup Exec servers can back it up. So the agent for Windows functions as a service, and when we look at services, you'll see the agent for Windows there. It performs all the tasks locally, and it can gather up any of the data that's on the local machine. Anything that's on the list you see on this slide. This agent requires a modern Windows operating system, Windows Server 2003 or newer, XP, SP2 or newer. We can back up workstations as well. Anything that you see on the list here, a minimum of 512 megs of memory above what the operating system needs. So if you're running Server 2008, you need at least 2 gigs of memory for Server 2008, plus 512 for the agent. CPU, anything that you see on the list here, the agent has a very small footprint as far as how much space it occupies on the local machine. It does use .NET 2.0 and MS XML 6.0, and you must have local administrator rights in order to install the agent. There are many, many methods for installing the agent for Windows. You can do a push install from the Backup Exec server. You can install it from the Backup Exec installation media if you burned a DVD. You can use the Add Server option in the console to add a server and push the agent. I can use Microsoft Active Directory to manage that installation, or I can use a command script if I choose to. The installation itself logs all the information about the installation in the file that you see here, rawsinst2012.htm, and this log file will be on the agent side at the end of that installation. If you're going to push the agent from the Backup Exec server, you can select several machines that you want the agent to be installed to. You can use the Shift or the Control key to select many machines and push the agent concurrently to all those machines. This installation is threaded to run 5 at a time. So if I had chosen to put the agent on 10 computers, it would do the first 5, and as soon as one is finished, it would begin the next one. So your list may be very long, but it will only run 5 at a time across your network. I cannot push install the guest when the remote computer is in forced guest configuration. That's a Windows XP setting. You need to be using a UNC path rather than mapped drives. If you select these from the Backup Exec console, it will automatically be a UNC path. You need to have file and print sharing on in the firewall exceptions list because the installation is going to use file and printer sharing. That is true whether it is Vista, Server 2008, or Windows 7, and those all need to have WMI up and running. If you're going to push the agent to a computer that is already running a semantic endpoint protection agent version 11 or newer, then that semantic endpoint protection agent needs to be configured to share files and printers. If you're going to use the Add Server option to push the agent, you begin with the Backup and Restore tab. Click the Add button in the ribbon. It will ask you what type of server do you wish to add to Backup Exec. Then it will ask you if you want to establish a trust. This trust has nothing to do with Windows. This is a trust between the remote agent and the Backup Exec server. We do have to pass a certificate, so when the Backup Exec server pushes the remote agent, a certificate will pass with that agent. When a backup kicks off and the Backup Exec server says, hey, remote agent, hand me all your data, the remote agent has to match the certificates so that it makes sure that it is a valid Backup Exec server. So this trust is strictly within Backup Exec. If you do not tick this checkbox to allow the trust, you cannot install the agent. You must allow the trust, and that certificate must be installed along with the agent. Once you allow the trust, you can click Next, and it will show you a list of servers to which the agent can be pushed. You can browse your domain to add servers here. And then what logon account is going to be used to connect to those servers. This logon account should, at a minimum, be a member of the local administrators group to do this installation. But this is also the account that will be used when the backups occur. So this should be an account that has read and write rights to the data housed on that machine that you're backing up. Do you wish to upgrade the backup exec agent if it's an older version? And the optional checkbox down here at the bottom is to restart the agent computer if a restart is required. It's not always required. It depends on what's being pushed, if it's an upgrade or a full installation, and the operating system to which you are pushing the agent. So the restarts are not going to be consistent across all machines. In many cases, it's a best practice not to tick the checkbox for restart, knowing that the agent will not complete its installation until a restart has finished, and that you should restart that server on its regular maintenance cycle. You will see the agent install, and then it will hopefully say successful. It will tell you whether or not a restart is required, and you would know then that you need to restart that server. I can push the agent installation from the installation media as well. So if you have burned the download for Backup Exec's installation to a DVD, you could drop the DVD in the server that you're building that you want an agent on, and just run the installation from there. I can also do it from just a directory structure. When I create my Backup Exec server, it will put all of the installation files on the Backup Exec server. Most environments have a directory structure that IT can browse to do installations. So you put all of your software installation files in one share. So you could copy from the Backup Exec server the installation files for the agent, or you could copy them from the installation media. The files that you're looking for are in folders named ROS32 and ROSX64. So if you copy those directories to your software installation file, you could browse to that directory share and install the agent from there as well. If you're running it from the installation DVD, the path is BE/WinNT/install. And then you'll see the ROS32 and ROS64 folders. And this will all install the agent. The rules about reboots still apply. The first time that the agent contacts the server, you will have to allow it to establish a trust. So I can establish trusts between the Backup Exec server and the remote server. I can start the Backup Exec agent utility. By default, it does not display anything in the tray. You can turn that on if you choose to. I can limit the publishing for the agent. By default, the agent publishes to all Backup Exec servers. So any server in your environment can back up the machine running the agent. You can limit that. So the agent will only publish to specific Backup Exec servers by hostname or IP address. I can configure database access to Oracle. There is a command line applet for the agent. This is mostly used for server core. So server 2008 core version requires the command line applet, and you can allow the agent to function across firewalled environments. To establish the trust, the agent will prompt, and you'll see it on the server side, do you want to establish a trust? This is sending the certificate so that both sides understand that they are the legitimate server or agent. And if the trust is not established, you will not be able to back up that machine that's running the agent. So that trust has to exist. If you want to start the Backup Exec agent utility on the machine that you're backing up, if you go to Start, Programs, Semantic Backup Exec, you'll see the agent utility. By default, it does not put anything in the tray. You can tell it to put the icon in the tray if you choose to, and it will show the icons that you see on this screen. Most of the time it will show as idle. If you have a backup running, you'll get the little green circle with the arrow in it that shows that you have an active backup. By default, it does bring up the screen that you see here, which is to start the agent utility every time you log on. You can uncheck this box and then the server will not display this screen on reboot. The first screen that we're looking at here is status. This would only be populated if a backup is running. If there's a backup running, it will show you the server to which it is sending its data and the current folder that's being sent. The refresh interval is a heartbeat that's being sent from the agent to the server that just says, I'm here. I'm here. You can back me up. The next tab over is publishing. This is the servers to which the agent is reporting so that any of these servers on this list can back up this agent. You can limit to whom this agent publishes. I can add or remove servers from this list. So this would allow only the servers that are listed here to back up that agent. The publishing interval you see here is every 240 minutes, so it's not very often that it's going to connect across the network, but you could also set that for a longer time on very busy networks. Database access has to do with credentials to access Oracle databases. So this is who has the rights for DB Data Reader and DB Data Writer into Oracle. And it will show you any Oracle instances to which this agent can connect. The agent is simply a service that runs on the machine that's being backed up. So if we take a look at services, what you will see is the Backup Exec remote agent for Windows. This service should be started and it should be set to automatic. If you're running Server 2003 or Server 2008 Server Core, there is no point and click interface. So you will not have access to the publishing screen that we looked at a moment ago for the agent. There is a command line applet, so you can do the same functionality using the command line because that's the only tool that you have on Server Core. So you can tell the agent to which server it should publish, and you can read the logs using the command line applet. ramcmd.exe is the command line applet, and if you run that executable with a /?, you'll see all the switches that you can use. The agent by default is going to be pushed from the Backup Exec server through port 10,000. So that port will need to be open in order to push install the agent. By default, the agent is going to listen for connections on that port. But when a backup kicks off, the Backup Exec, by default, the Backup Exec server is going to open a port in the firewall. If you have enabled network and security for dynamic port range, that is a random port within the range that you see on this slide shot. So the Backup Exec server is going to open a port in the firewall within this range, a random port within this range. The agent will package up the data and send the data back through the same port that was opened by the Backup Exec server. So at any given time, only one port will be open between the Backup Exec server and the agent. You can shorten this range. It is recommended that you not shorten it to a range of 1, and the connection by default is an NDMP connection, or Network Data Management Protocol connection. So this should be through the ports that NDMP would normally use. When you're looking at the Backup Exec server side and you have said that you want to back up a server, if you can drill down and see details of that server, volumes and folders on the server, that's telling you that the agent service is installed and running. If you can't drill down and see volumes on a server, it may just be that the service is not running. You can right-click on the server as well and get information about the agent to see the version of the agent that's running on that server. I can monitor server activity from the list of servers that shows that that agent is sending data or has sent all of its data and completed the backup. The agent for Linux allows me to back up Linux machines using very similar functionality to the agent for Windows. You see here the versions of Linux we support. There's a longer list in just a moment. The agent for Linux has to be installed and configured. In the case of Linux, it's a daemon that runs. You can back up using a full backup. Differential and incremental backups use modified time, and it compares the modified time to records in the catalogs to look at the changes for the files. The agent for Linux also installs an open file manager for Linux, so that the agent can back up open files using snapshot technology, and this is known as the Advanced Open File Option for Linux, or AOFOL. On this screen you see the versions of Linux that we support. There is also an agent for Macintosh as well. Macintosh OS X or OS 10 and newer are really versions of Linux. So the agent for Macintosh is the same technology that you see in the agent for Linux. If you have any question about whether or not the agent for Linux will support machines in your environment, please check the software compatibility list. You see the URL for that on this screenshot. The requirements for this agent are very similar to the requirements for the Windows agent. It uses 512 megs of RAM above what the operating system needs. It does need to do name resolution. So if you're using NIS or NIS Plus, the BE Opera group must exist. The agent by default, the agent for Linux by default will create this group if needed, but you may need to adjust accordingly for name resolution in your environment. It must also have an account that has access to do the installation, so it must be a root equivalent or a super user equivalent. The agent for Linux is a daemon. By default, it is set to start automatically, but you can manually start it, and when you do the installation, it will create the BE Opera group for you. This agent also logs all of the installation routine in the path that you see here. If you need to manually start the agent, we do have knowledge base articles from that. To do an installation of this agent, you need to use the Backup Exec DVD or copy the files from the Backup Exec server. And what you need to run is the install Rawlus file. And you'll run that with a /install Rawlus. It will give you several prompts. Just follow the prompts, and it should create the BE Opera group for you automatically. You could push this using RSH or SSH if those are available in your environment. After the installation completes, make sure that the Rawlus daemon is started. It should be automatically started by the installer. So you'll see that the daemon is also installing a SimSnap driver. This is the open file option for Linux. This is the snapshot provider for Linux. It will ask you if you want to automatically start the agent. And you'll see the BE Opera group. This is for name resolution. If you're not using NIS or NIS Plus, you'll have to create the BE Opera group on each Linux host that you will be backing up. Communication between the Linux agent and the Backup Exec server is configured using a file on the client side called rawlus.cfg. This file that exists on the client side establishes publishing, just like we saw on the Windows side. The rules are the same. By default, this agent publishes to all backup exec servers. You can limit that by editing this file. Rawlist.cfg also is the exclude list for Linux. On the Windows side, you can exclude using the backup exec console in the job definition itself, in the backup definition itself. On the Linux side, if you wish to exclude files from backup, you need to edit rawlist.cfg. Very common files to exclude here are anything that is core. Core files are often excluded. There are some good knowledge base articles if you are interested in this, and I encourage you to go to semantic.com/business/support and look for rawlist.cfg for those knowledge base articles. When you look at the backup exec console and you see servers listed that are running the Linux agent, the first thing that should jump out at you is that you will see the little Linux icon on the server list. So on this screenshot, we see Jupiter.galaxy with a Windows icon and Mars.galaxy with a Linux icon. When you drill down into that server to create a backup job, you'll notice that it comes in as root. When you edit those selections, then you should see all of the volumes on the Linux server, and you can do dynamic inclusion just like exists on the Windows side. You can tell it to refresh. You should see all of the volumes. You must also provide credentials for Linux. Typically, your login account for Backup Exec does not have enough rights to back up or, more importantly, restore your Linux server. So this should be a root equivalent account on the Linux side. You will need to test these credentials. The advanced open file option is the SimSnap option that was installed during the agent installation that allows the Linux agent to create a cache of open files so that as the backup is running, we don't back up the open file, we back up the cache that the SimSnap option created. So the advanced open file option for Linux is by default there, and it's supported for all Linux platforms, but it allows us to back up open files with a lock on the cache, so we are not interrupting the open file itself. If you'd like more information on that, you can see the software compatibility list that's on the screenshot. I do have to tell the backup definition to use snapshot technology. This is on by default, and if you tell it to automatically select the snapshot technology, which is also the default, on the Linux side, it will choose that SimSnap option. Best practices for the agent for Linux. I need to back up my user data and config files. The only option you can use here is by modified time. Linux machines do not have an archive bit, so all backups must be done based on modified time. You need to make sure that you disable file locking for backup jobs, and make sure that the open file option is enabled that we just looked at. You need to exclude pipes and socks from the backup jobs. These are networking protocols. And I need to make sure that the backup jobs do not follow symbolic links and mount points unless they're the only access to that data. Otherwise, you'll wind up backing up the data twice. So if the symbolic link or the mount point is the only way to get to that data, then you would need to check the box to follow mount points. You can edit rawlist.cfg to exclude things that you need to. I need to make sure that if I'm backing up Mac OS, I have appropriate credentials. It is a best practice to run a small restore job on a regular basis to make sure that you have access, write access, but also to make sure that your storage media is being formatted appropriately for Linux. Do not restore data across operating systems, and this is true either direction. If it was backed up from a Windows machine, it needs to be restored to a Windows machine. If it was backed up from Linux, it needs to be restored to Linux. Files will not work if you try to send them to a different operating system. So in this lesson, we have talked about the functions and capabilities of the agent for Windows, how to install the agent for Windows and the agent for Linux, and how to protect the machines that are running those agents. And we have talked about the functions of the agent for Linux and how to back up Linux servers using that agent.